أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلق ونور عرش أفضل الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيبنا وسيدنا وسندنا وشفيعنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المأسومين المظلومين. I begin in Allah's name, the Beneficent, the Merciful, and all praise belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving us this life and for giving us such fantastic role models as Khadija bint Khuwaylid. As you know, she was the most beloved wife of the Holy Prophet, who remained his loyal wife until her departure from this world after having sacrificed everything that she had for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I first and foremost send our condolences to the whole human race on the loss of such a great personality. And to me, she embodies the true definition of womanhood. For when I look at Fatima al-Zahra, salamullahi alayha, as Sayyidat al-Nisa al-Alameen, as the leader of all the women in the world, I must give credit to the mother who bore her, who gave her that kind of prescription, and of course, the kind of nurturing that made her such a great lady. Khadija alayhi salam is a gift of God, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exemplifies her roles as a woman in a period where ignorance was prevalent. Women and children were considered low, especially girls. Girls were buried alive. Fathers, unfortunately, used to take their daughters, and the daughter would be very happy that the father is taking her out, when in fact he digs a grave for her. And that thought just brings a lot of tear in my heart, for it is just unfathomable how a human being is capable of doing such a thing to their own blood and their own children. But this is the indicator of the level of ignorance that was present at that time. And women who were stepmothers, if the father dies, she becomes an inheritance to the son, and he can actually sell her in the market. That was what was prevalent at that time. Women were considered objects of pleasure, were considered objects of labor, and they were used only when it was beneficial for the men. And this is, of course, historical. If you go to Asia, in India, China, Japan, you look at all the countries, Africa, Nigeria, for example, you look at Algeria, you look at many of these countries, you hear the stories where women are used as objects, third class objects, unfortunately, where even if their husbands die, they are sort of told that you're no longer valuable, and now you need to sort of shave your head and just die away. In India, there's a practice called sati, where when the husband dies, unfortunately, even the wife gets killed with the husband. This treachery is forbidden in Islam. And the messenger, through Khadija, emancipates the very principles of justice. When Allah in Surah Al-Hujurat says, Ya ayyuhan nas, inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha, wa ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qaba'ila lita'arafu, inna akramakum inda Allahi atqakum. O mankind, we have made you into male and female nations and tribes, so you know each other. And the most honorable to Allah is the one who's God conscious. And the Quran has balanced that. If you look at the time Allah addresses men, it's the equal time Allah addresses women in the Quran. And Allah gives each gender their due justice. For we know that a woman cannot be a man, nor can a man be a woman. So this notion of total equality, even in gender, is absurd. We have to recognize this distinction between male and female, men and women. And we have to recognize and honor each side. And I always use this example, like a bird whose wings are needed for the bird to be mobile and to fly. And both wings require equal amount of capacities, though they are mirror images of each other, and they cannot be exchanged, for then the bird will not fly, nor can you clip one side of the wing, meaning shorten it or weaken it, for then the bird will go into a tailspin and won't be able to fly either. Men and women are those two wings on a bird, and both sides need to be given honor and dues. Unfortunately, the misogyny that exists historically, just like the bigotry against dark-skinned people. These two diseases continue to be pervasive in our societies. And I feel empowered to speak about this tonight, for Lady Khadija gives me a tremendous amount of honor and power to tell me that while in that very difficult state of ignorance in Mecca, she was an enterprising woman, full of honor, never worshipped an idol, was never an idolater, and her wealth did not get into her mind, into her head, into her character. She was as humble as they come. And the proof is in the pudding when you ask the Holy Prophet, who said that Khadija and I will be in paradise together. By the way, the Prophet did not say about any of his other wives whether he will be in paradise with them together. But Khadija, he did. He said, Khadija and I will be in paradise together. She is that highest quality Ummul Mu'mineen. And as you know, by the way, just a quick footnote, why are the wives of the Prophet called Ummul Mu'mineen? Some people have misunderstood this, thinking that they are the mothers of the believers. No, they are the mothers of the believers, but there's a reason why they are called Ummul Mu'mineen. When Allah says, An-Nabiyyu awla bil-mu'minina min anfusihim wa azwajuhu ummahatuhum, meaning that the wives are like your mothers. What that means is that once a woman marries the Holy Prophet, she is forbidden to marry anyone else on earth. Haram. So hence the title Ummul Mu'mineen. Just like we're forbidden to marry our mothers, you find that the wives of the Prophet become like our mothers, but they are not our mothers in the sense of replacing our mothers. For logically, if we consider them to be our mothers replacing our mothers, then the Holy Prophet should be considered our father, whereas the Quran clearly states, Ma kana Muhammadin, right? Aba ahad min rijalikum. The Prophet Muhammad is not the father of any man. Walakin Rasulullah wa khatam an-nabiyyin. Rather, he is the messenger of God and the seal of prophets. So it's very important for us to understand that. And among the wives of the Prophet, when the messenger was married to Khadija for 25 years, you find that he remained with her and he married no other woman. And his love for her was so intense that even after he married all the other wives, he would always mention Khadija alayhi salam, to such an extent that some of the wives were jealous. They were so jealous. They said, why do you mention that old woman whose eyes were red? And the messenger would become very annoyed. And he would say that there is no woman that has made me happy, even now, like Khadija. Meaning he's telling his existing wives, you cannot compare yourselves with Khadija. Khadija believed in me in the early stages. She protected, she spent her wealth. She was always with me and she consoled me. And historians say that when Khadija alayhi salam died after the boycott that took place in Shayba Abu Talib, you find that she suffered tremendously, gave all her wealth. And what is interesting is we think it's usually the men who finance the family, who finance projects, who finance foundations and movements. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing us that it was actually Khadija who financed the establishment. There was the finality, the final establishment of Islam. In fact, they say when Salman, when he was emancipated from his Jewish owner, the messenger gave him a tray, and you find that the people, of course, were financing it, but to use that example of Salman being given gold, although Khadija had left the world, but the wealth that she left for the emancipation of slaves is equivalent to that, in that she completely gave all her wealth to the establishment of Islam. And I think we're blessed tonight to have a group of 3 sisters in the panelists, for I think it's important for us to discuss the misconceptions, to demystify this notion that the female gender is of the lesser, stage, and we gauge them based on domestic abilities. How good are they in cooking? How good are they in cleaning? Whereas their wisdom, their ability to establish many, many great movements for humanity is not limited to domestic work. For domestic work is also the obligation of men. Allah never said that domestic work is the obligation of women. It's the obligation of both genders. And we will continue to discuss this, inshallah. I just wanted to establish today that Khadija alayhi salam to me represents the ultimate role model. And when I look at a woman, my mother, my wife, my daughters, my sister, the women of the world, when I look at them, I say, how much of this personality emulates Khadija alayhi salam? How much of my personality emulates Khadija, not only in the women, but of course myself? How much do I follow in her footsteps? For she was truly a great, great, great role model. As we know, there are 4 chosen women on earth, and we'll talk about Maryam alayhi salam when Allah says, Inna Allah astafaki wa taharaki, when the angel Jibreel comes with the good news to Maryam bint Imran, and God says, we've purified you and chosen you among the women of all nations. We find that there are 4 women like that. Asiya, the wife of Fir'aun, she was known as Asiya bint Muzahim. The second one is Maryam bint Imran. The third is Khadija bint Khuwaylid. And of course, the fourth is Fatima al-Zahra, salamullahi alayhi, the daughter of the Prophet and Khadija. These 4 women are considered the highest. And of course, among them is Zainab alayhi salam. Many other women, Hajra is included, and many other that we will discuss in this dialogue, inshallah. Brother Amil, inshallah, you will take over.
Thank you, Brother Hassanain, for that introduction on this great lady, Khadija alayhi salam. And it's very interesting, as you mentioned, regarding the status of Khadija, the role of women, and how Islam really elevated the status of women at a time when the women had no rights. And you mentioned how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even in the Quran, mentions that when the young daughters were being buried alive at that time period, they would cry out, بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ, and what sin have I committed that you are trying to kill me? And of course, the prophets, one of the very first things that the Holy Prophet in the religion of Islam did when it came to these people, these pagans at the time of Jahiliyyah, was to abolish this practice of burying daughters alive. And in fact, this abolition of the burying of daughters was one of the first things that brought people to the religion of Islam, such as the mother of Ammar ibn Yasir, Sumayyah, who was one of the very first converts to the religion of Islam, and she was very touched by the Prophet and seeing that there's a man who believes in the equal rights of women and abolished this practice. And it's very interesting, you find with Lady Khadija alayhi salam, as you mentioned, that it was her wealth that financed the religion of Islam. And there's a saying which states that Islam would not have flourished if it was not for the wealth of Khadija and the sword of Ali alayhi salam, meaning that it was the wealth of Lady Khadija alayhi salam which allowed the Prophet to spread the religion of Islam, to feed the poor, to free the slaves, and the bravery and the courage of Imam Ali alayhi salam on the battlefield and defending the Prophet that allowed the Prophet to continue spreading the message of Islam. And of course, it is through Lady Khadija alayhi salam that we have the great Lady Fatima alayhi salam. And it's very interesting that Allah could have given the Prophet a son to become the next Imam and continue the lineage of Imamah, but instead He gave the Prophet a daughter in Lady Fatima alayhi salam, who became the link and the connection between Nabuwah, which is prophethood, and Imamah. So it's very interesting that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the Prophet a daughter to become this link and connection, and the Prophet honored her in such a way. In a society when the women had no rights, the Prophet, when she used to walk into the room, he would stand up out of honor and respect for her. And this completely shifted the perspective that the people at the time had on having children, specifically daughters, and the role and the status of women at that time period. Alhamdulillah, as Brother Hassanain mentioned, we're honored to have several sisters with us today to share their thoughts and inshallah contribute to our discussion on the great Lady Khadija alayhi salam and the role and status of women in the religion of Islam. Inshallah, we have Sister Barak with us, we have Sister Maryam with us, and Sister Hafsa with us. Inshallah, I'll ask Sister Maryam if she'd like to start, and then inshallah we'll ask the other panelists to go and share some of their thoughts as well.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for having me. It's again another pleasure and honor to be here. A few things stood out from what Brother Hassanain was saying is, the elevation of women, and particularly from looking from a Quranic perspective. The Quran speaks directly to women, and very few books, if any, speak to women. Holy scriptures speak to women directly. And we have to look at the fact that Islam and the Quran has been used to elevate and bring kind of shed this male-female paradigm and speak to us based on our belief in our faith. Similarly, thinking of how we break these paradigms, oftentimes when we speak about the roles of women in Islam, we think of the words and the work in which they've done as sacrifices. And we can see that, oftentimes that word is used as a feminine word, or Khadija sacrificed, or Hajj alayhi salam, all of them sacrificed. But we have to be careful because it takes the ability, the importance of the hardship that they experienced, just as all the other prophets have experienced hardship. But sacrifice takes away, kind of minimizes that this work, the hardship, the test, was actually an ability for them to step into a place of leadership. And their actions were not so much from a place of sacrifice, but that of guidance. And when we look at it from a place of guidance, as leadership, as really them stepping into what Allah had planned for them, it allows us, male and female, just as women look to our male prophets for guidance, it also offers for men to look through women leadership as guidance, and to look at their life and their struggles and take away gender, and thinking of how does one give their wealth to support a cause, even when it is unpopular, or even when it may be what goes against our beliefs. And so I'm very curious about Hassanain, so often in this kind of in this male-female paradigm, we don't make space for women or their leadership or their guidance in these areas. And I'm curious to know what you think should be done to be able to kind of elevate women, just as the Quran has, to make sure that their voices are also heard, and that their stories are seen just as any other story in the Quran.
Thank you, Sister Mariam. That was beautiful. Good introduction. We have to question, first of all, why is it that women among the two genders are the marginalized ones? Why is it that dark-skinned people are marginalized in society? What is it about? What's causing this? Let's sort of try to find some of these reasons, right? You will find that actually it's this promotion of the idea of the survival of the fittest, this concept that sort of poisons our ethical mind sometimes, survival of the fittest notions, that the stronger you are, the more dominant you are, and therefore the more valuable you are. And unfortunately, the society draws this consistent picture that a woman is the weaker gender, and therefore she is of the second class. This idea is where the problem lies. That, women also always look to be nurtured. If you ask women, they love to be protected. That's their nature, but that's by divine decree, and it's beautiful. But that doesn't make the man stronger than the woman. In fact, there's a beautiful hadith of a group of very strong men in Medina who were lifting up boulders and throwing it. And the messenger passed by and they said, Ya Rasulullah, watch us and tell us which one of us is the strongest. And as they're throwing the boulders, the messenger smiled. He said, none of you are strong. He said, but we're lifting boulders. It's not easy to lift boulders. He says, strength does not lie in your ability to lift heavy weights. Strength lies in your ability to prevent your anger, meaning to control your anger. That's when you're really strong. وَالْقَاذِمِينَ الْغَيْظِ وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ. You're able to forgive mankind. That's the real strength of humanity. So what we have done is we become very material, very superficial in validating or evaluating qualities of people on a very wrong, what we call a misplaced scale. The real scale is in the ability of the individual to sustain trials and tribulations and to be patient in that. وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ أُولَٰئِكَ عَلَيْهِمْ صَلَوَاتٌ مِّن رَّبِّهِمْ وَرَحْمَةٌ وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُهْتَدُونَ. Allah in this verse in Surah Al-Baqarah says He is with the patient ones. Inna Allaha ma'as sabirin. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that when they do go through this difficulty, they say, indeed, we are from Allah and we return to Allah. And they are patient. And God says, give good news to the patient ones. And that God sends greetings to them, and they are the ones who are rightly guided. Well, examine among the genders, both sides have qualities of tremendous amount of abilities to practice patience. And we should gauge values based on that, not based on the size of somebody's muscles. But we are living in a very plastic society today. Everything is figuratively shown, and somehow we're triggered in a Pavlovian way to think of one thing. And then media associates those kinds of qualities with certain ideologies. And we perpetuate very wrong ideas. I mean, just to give you an example, the notion that Adam and Eve and Hawa approached the tree, right? Quran says they both approached the tree. But notice in some religions, they say it was Eve who tempted Adam to eat from the tree. So it was Eve who caused the downfall of mankind. It was a woman. And that has continued to perpetuate until today in a very sick way, to the level that, you know, we can't let a woman judge. We can't let her be this. She cannot be part of the organization. Just be careful. And we go on and on perpetuating these. Up in the United States, up to the 1920s, a woman could not vote. You know, a 200-year-old country, imagine, more than half of its time, it could not vote, right? A woman was not allowed to vote. And women were considered domestic objects. So this emancipation started early on in Islam with the Holy Prophet. And of course, our preceding prophets did the same thing. But in the period of the messenger, there was so much ignorance that Khadija was that scion who represented this entrepreneurship. Just think about an entrepreneur, a businesswoman, 1400 years ago is unfathomable. And that when her wealth was carried, there was an army of men who carried her wealth. That's the kind of wealth this woman had, unheard of. Her wisdom, you know, her sagacity, her patience, her generosity. I mean, it's unparalleled in history. And I think we need to expose that on a consistent basis. I get so connected with such personality. When I go to Medina, the first thing I do when I go to Jannatul Baqi is I visit the grave of the mother of Abbas, Ummul Banin. Ummul Banin, the mother of Abbas. To me, she is that representation of that great woman. And I stand by her grave and I always cry. And I said, I want our mothers, our daughters, our spouses, our sisters to be like you. For you are the best. For how could anybody surpass you? That level of passion and love that you have for God. And yes, Sister Mariam, the word sacrifice, unfortunately, is misused. When we say the men sacrifice, we think, wow, what a great person. But when a woman sacrifices, of course she's supposed to. She's a woman. She's supposed to. It comes part and parcel of the package. And that needs to be discussed further.
Thank you, Brother Hassan. Just on the issue you mentioned, the word sacrifice. Of course, the Quran says, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ, that you will not achieve righteousness until you give from that which you love most. And this is sacrifice. Sacrifice is something that's honored in the religion of Islam. Whether it's a man or a woman sacrificing, it's honorable in the eyes of Allah.
Let me jump in, Brother Amil. Exactly what you just said. But here's the irony. Exactly what you said. لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. We all say, well, sacrifice. But as Sister Mariam mentioned, somehow, mentally, communally, socially, within the sphere of the human race, the word sacrifice is belittled when a woman does it. But when a man does it, we elevate it. But when a woman does it, we say, yeah, she's supposed to. So then what we do is now we force them to sacrifice unfairly because you're supposed to. This is where the breach of justice comes in. But please, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Alhamdulillah, we're also honored to have today with us Sister Barak once again. Sister Barak, please, why don't you share some thoughts, inshallah. Sister Barak?
Yes, I'm right there. Just about to turn on the camera, sorry. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. So I've put together some thoughts in honor of Sayyida Khadija that I've thought about before, and just listening to this discussion, it's very similar to some thoughts I've had before. So we take a look always that there's been a lot of discussion, analysis, and debates about the status of women in Islam, and now more so in recent years in light of what's happening in the world today. And so it's interesting to see from various speakers, commentators, and leaders from both men and women who have somewhat become the spokespeople and public faces of Muslim women issues. And these discussions, they've been centered around topics such as hijab. In recent years, the burkini and its implications on women's rights to cover or not to cover, forced hijab, women's interpretation of their rights, expression of hijab in various forms that are questionable, especially when we see the fashion and beauty bloggers. We also look at women's rights to work or get educated or stay at home, and oppression against women by men, and oppression against women from women as well. So we see issues around divorce, honor killings, violence against women in the Muslim community, and the list goes on, of course. So these tend to seem like modern issues, social and mental and psychological issues. And so when we're being so busy with the noise around these so-called modern issues, we tend to forget the past and the whispers of the past and the figures of our past. And these whispers are hardly heard these days or even recognized anymore as the original influencers, so to speak, in our modernity. And so, in fact, these voices that are there, it's a huge disconnect from the figures, and more so loudly, these voices nowadays claiming that these people and stances are very irrelevant to our modern lives. And so these figures and their stances that I'm speaking of course, are so relevant to the issues today, whether from a societal point of view, a moral or a psychological, especially the crisis the Muslims are experiencing now more than ever. I know things are a little bit different now because of the quarantine, but pre-pandemic, these were issues that we've been experiencing all along. So of course, I am referring to Lady Fatima, Lady Khadija, and Lady Zainab alayhum assalam. We spoke about earlier the environment in terms of how women were during the time of the pre-Jahiliyyah, or the pre-Islamic rather era, and how in the early days of Islam and during the remainder of Lady Khadija's life. So we see clearly that at that time that the lady herself was not far removed from the struggles that we experience today, right? And so to learn from Lady Khadija alayhi salam is to embody her values, her character, her business savvy that we spoke about, right? Her respect and love to her husband and her daughter, and of course her confidence. And I would call her a modern, independent, strong woman, even though she was married, and she was married to the most noblest of men and the example for us. So to love this great woman is to try to strive towards what she stands for. And especially in the times that we're in so-called modern Muslim woman and the challenges that she has to live through. So this brings me to the idea of women empowerment, how it comes through clearly, at least from my perspective as somebody who works in mental health and well-being, and from that psychological perspective. And that I find that this women empowerment comes clearly through Lady Khadija, but not necessarily, and definitely not through the modern Western feminist role models that a lot of our young women look up to for inspiration, especially through social media, right? So why do we then, why is it then that we don't look at these original women of empowerment the same way? Why are they forgotten, and why are they replaced by feminists as though that is real women power, right? So the Western feminism came about, as we know, in the last century, like the Hajj was mentioning, and this was supposedly a movement that came to liberate and emancipate women from the shackles of the male dominance. And so through these victories of the right to vote, to have a career, and to liberate herself through the shortening or revealing of her body, and also to be used as a sex object, right? So this in turn has been flipped on now onto the covered Muslim woman as being oppressed because of her choice in terms of how she wants to show herself to the world, or because she chooses to raise a family rather than pursue a career, and so on. So we need to remind the feminists that Islam gave the rights of women 1400 years ago, not just in the last century, which is what they have gotten, right? These rights, as we know, include the right to education, the right to work, to keep her own money, to keep her own name, and so on. And so these rights, when we talk about them, to people of different faiths and non-Muslims. And even, by the way, our own Muslim women, they raise their eyebrows and question, say, do we really have these? They question, because we don't hear about them unless you read about them or ask about them. And we see more and more people are speaking about these rights, right? So when we are aware of these rights that we have, this gives a sense of pride in the knowledge that our own religion has these factors to begin with in protecting and ensuring the rights of our women. Yet we still need to distinguish and recognize the difference between what the faith teaches us and how it is practiced, because there's Muslims and then there's Islam. So there's a difference, of course, between the two. And so these are the rights that need to be protected by those in positions of power. And so this becomes, when this is not protected, then this becomes a failure of human error. And unfortunately, it's attributed to Islam as opposed to the people who are practicing it, right? And so this is how we see in Western media, how it projects it. And this also is seen through the medium of Islamophobia, unfortunately, especially when it attacks women and what we've heard, the flag bearers of Islam. So the visible lighthouse and the powerful image that demands the attention, the modest Muslim woman in hijab. And of course, this is, again, in honor of Sayyidah Khadija alayhi salam, who practiced that modesty, who practiced being a woman with a career, practiced being a wife and a mother, and she was able to do all of that. And so this in itself, I find an incredible inspiration for us. And I find a lot of young people tend to look at other influencers today and forget the original role models that we do have to look up to.
I think you make a great point, Sister Barak, with reference to the keyword influencers. Today, in the modern time, we have influencers. They're paid, right? And they're paid by companies to influence people to either buy a product or to go do something, right? And influencers, unfortunately, even work at a level where they're getting paid to go and buy the product is sent to them for free. Then they go on and then they give it, 5 stars to make sure that, once again, there are these subtle influencers to try to promote products, right? And you're right. I think the key word here is influencers. And from your mental health perspective, as you note, I think it's very important if we can take the general public and make them aware of where the real traps are so that we don't follow the wrong influencers and follow the right influencers. May Allah bless you. Brother Amali, take over.
Thank you, Brother Hassanain. Inshallah, of course, tomorrow we'll continue this discussion about mental health and influencers, and the impact that has not only on women, but of course, all of us as human beings. Inshallah, we also have with us today Sister Hafsa, joining us once again from New Zealand. Sister Hafsa, please, why don't you share some comments?
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I was quite enjoying the discussion going on. So, but I do have a few points to make, especially because I had to leap onto this topic because this is my favorite. Lady Khadija alayhi salam is very dear to me. She is part of me, I would say. And so I send my condolences to everyone before I begin on the night of this lady who is an example for all of us because of the compassion and selflessness that she had. She lived a life of service like Hajj Hassanain and everyone else have pointed out. And it is that life of service that we all want to achieve, not just because she gave up or she sacrificed, but she was a role model, which all of us can aspire for and try to become like. And I definitely want to mention one specific thing which always touches my heart, which is from the Prophet, which says that she believed in me when people rejected me. And that itself is so profound that she stood by him when there was no one with him. Especially, we know Imam Ali alayhi salam was there, but just that statement of standing with someone, especially if it's your life partner, makes a lot of difference. And it was interesting because Sister Barak mentioned about the idea of feminism, because I'm not a feminist basher. I get the idea where they come from. The reason why they started off that movement, because they were oppressed and they had found no other alternative way to raise their voice, to raise their concern. But what I think it has become now, especially with corporate America driving this whole idea of gender equality and the idea of women have to be equal to men. I think there's a big difference between the idea of equity and equality. And I think I want to stress that point. Women and men are not equal, but equity is what is needed out there in terms of our ability to succeed and how we get the opportunities to make a difference to the communities we are part of. Because what you'll often see is that the idea that they have to be equal, hence give each one of them whatever they need at an equal level. But no, women are different because they have different skills and different strengths. And I tell you this because I was part of a discussion session with some academics, and there was this lady who was talking to us on International Women's Day, and she was sharing her journey. So she started off as being a very hardcore feminist who never cared about men and who hated men. And it was interesting to see her journey over the past 20 years. And what she settled for was, I was amazed when I listened to her because she came to this realization that I don't have to do this. As a woman, I have special strengths in me which make a big difference to the community. And what she was able to do was she was able to articulate it. And she said that my strength is actually my ability to care and nurture, which I think a lot of women don't realize when they're trying to fit into this picture of, I have to be out there, I have to be like these all amazing women out there. Because also, again, like we've said, the media's portrayal of success. Success is very personal. Success for some might be achieving that high position in an organization, achieving that top-notch chief executive level. But for some, success is very different. Like for me, if I were to define success for me, at the end of the day, for me, if I've had a successful day, it is me assessing whether I was able to have a meaningful conversation with my children, whether I was able to read a book with my daughter or my son. So that definition of success needs to be revisited in terms of how women are looked up to in the world out there. And just because we are talking about the strengths of men and women, and I think Hajj Hassanain has raised it already, that we each have individual capacities and we have potential to become the best of what we can be. And I think I had allude to the verse in Surah Ahzab, verse 35, where Allah says that, it is the submitting men and women, it is the believing men and women, it is the obeying men and women, it's the truthful men and women, it's the patient men and women, it's the humble men and women that will be getting his reward. So just wanted to add that. I hope I didn't speak for too long. And I'll now hand over back to you, Brother Amir.
Thank you, Sister Hafsa, for your comment. Inshallah, all the panelists, inshallah, we will continue our discussion. I know, Sister Maryam, you wanted to add some comments, please.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate what Sister Hafsa is saying in terms of using society as our measuring stick. I just wanted to just elaborate on 2 points, because I really believe our words matter. So in terms of men and women being equal, in the eyes of Allah, we are fully equal, because Allah is speaking to our nafs, and our nafs has no gender. When we approach Allah, we are not approaching him as a male or a female. And in fact, Islam gives us this great, hijab is one of those things that in the dunya allows us to actually have an equalizer, so that the content of our character, the content of our speech, the content of our spiritual connection with Allah is equal to that of male, female, regardless of gender, color, race. And then also, of course, as you were saying, success is, when we use these models of success, our definitions of success should not be guided by what the dunya says is our success. You can have a prophet who has wealth, like Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam, those who have no wealth, and those who their wealth gets tested and taken and given. And we have to remind ourselves that we can get so wrapped up into this world that we use the terminology that has been pushed upon us to really give us the shackles, that we don't use the words and the way in which Allah has, looked at us and elevates us. And that kind of brings me to my my thought and my question for you, Brother Hassanain. One of the things, particularly for young women who are looking to get married, one of the things that really stands out when we look at Khadija's life, alayhi salam, is that she married a man. Now, granted, he was, his prophethood was from birth, just as we discussed in one of the earlier days. He was always a special being. However, she married a man that had no status, he wasn't a prophet. He was a humble person who was not of her caliber, of her rank. And in our society today, you would say, well, this is not somebody who is befitting of her, and she clearly chose him. And it makes me think of, we have examples in the Prophet, in the Quran, of women who marry prophets, and those women some of them are considered good women or righteous women. And those who also marry people like Pharaoh and are also considered good women or righteous women, regardless of who their spouse is. And I would argue that really Khadija married a man who was committed to being honest and having spiritual growth. And through her spiritual growth, she married a man of character and worth and value beyond anything she could have even imagined. She couldn't have imagined that he would be given the honor of prophethood. And so my question to you, Brother Hassanain, is, as young women look for spouses, what should be their metric when we see these things of the dunya that can be taken or given to anyone? What should your advice be of how to choose a spouse that could give us somebody like Khadija or give us somebody like the Prophet Muhammad?
Thank you, Sister Mariam. It's a great question. Khadija alayhi salam married the Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because of his impeccable character. And the Quran established this, and says, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَىٰ خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. You don't become a prophet with bad characters. The precondition to being a prophet is that your character must be impeccable. Therefore, you're a prophet. Allah, when he chooses a being to be a prophet at birth, that one thing that's not negotiable is the characteristic of a person. They have to be impeccable at all levels of character, right? They have to be of the highest moral standards. Khadija alayhi salam recognized that. Historians say that even in the early stages of the messenger, when he first worked for Khadija alayhi salam, and when he took her caravan, to Syria, and he meets Bahira, there's a Christian monk whose name is Buhaira, actually, Buhaira, they're given different names. He recognizes the messenger and says, this is going to be the messenger of God. And as you know, Abdul Muttalib says, yes, I know. The Banu Hashim already knew this. Historians say Heraclius, who was the Byzantium emperor, speaks to Abdul Muttalib and says, do you know that your grandson is a prophet? He says, yes, I know. So it wasn't a secret, but it was not a very well publicized issue because there were many enemies who wanted to kill the messenger even before his birth. That when his mother Amina was carrying him, there were many attempts to kill her, before his birth, right? So his character was impeccable. And Khadija, of course, 1000% married him because of his character, not because of his prophethood, okay? But it came as a package deal because she was of such a high character too, that she not only gets the man with the best moral conduct, but also gets the messenger of God. And when the messenger returns from that trade, he has a private conversation with her. And she tells him, yes, I know you will be a prophet. In other words, you will be declared by God, right? Even in the early stages when he receives the revelations, Khadija was always with him. Even when they went to meet Warqa ibn Nawfal, some say it's the uncle, some say it's the cousin, who was a Christian monk in Medina, who was a believer in one God, who was the cousin of Khadija. Some say it's the uncle. Even then, Khadija had no issues at all. She said, yes, I know. So to answer your question, when we look for spouses, look for somebody who's got purity at heart, sincerity, and somebody who's got the ability or has been struggling to gain wisdom. For if a person has wisdom, even if they're atheists, they will become believers. Even if they don't wear hijab, they will wear hijab. Even if they don't pray, they will pray. For the highest quality of a person is when they have that natural inclination towards the good. So when you're looking for a spouse, find those characteristics, because our children will be what we say carbon copies of that. They say the fruits don't fall far from the tree. Very important to understand. Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam was asked that question, how do I choose a spouse? He said, if you're a female looking at the male as your husband, then see him as the father of your children. And if you're the male looking for the woman to be your spouse, then see her as the mother of your children. If she qualifies or he qualifies to be that, then marry them. Sister Hafsa mentioned that her feeling of success is when she's able to read a book with her children. Well, guess what? It's the same principle for the husband. You know, I know that when I sit with my daughter and I can teach her something and I can read with her and I can play with her and I can teach her to play tennis and swim, I feel very accomplished as a father, because my responsibility as a father is no different than her mother at this level. Sure, there are certain things that are especially for the mother, there's certain things especially for the father, but holistically, as you mentioned, that's our obligation. So this is the advice I give. Sometimes we look for a boy because he's rich. He's got the worst character, yeah, but he's rich. We'll inherit his wealth. Rich family giving their, lousy, vagabond son. Yeah, but he's rich. So it doesn't matter. He'll die soon. Or you find, women marrying 90-year-old men, right? So we ask him, do you love this man? Well, it's okay. He's got a lot of money. He's going to drop dead soon, and then we'll just inherit this money, and we'll move on with our lives. These kinds of relationships are, as we call, marriage of convenience. Look, with this pandemic today, so many of these marriages are breaking because they're exposing the nature of its convenience and not the depth of the marriage. Marriage should be, Quran says, لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. ومن آياته إن خلق لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا لتسكنوا إليها وجعل بينكم مودة ورحمة إن في ذلك لآيات لقوم يتفكرون. And of his signs is he made mates from among yourselves, so you get tranquility with the other. You see, لتسكنوا إليها, tranquility. You come home, it's a moment of tranquility. You at work and you think of your spouse, it's tranquility, it brings tranquility. لتسكنوا إليها. That's what we should be looking for. Not like, what did my husband buy me today? He didn't buy me that diamond. I don't like him anymore. I'm going to divorce it. What did my wife? She didn't cook. She didn't go to work today. She didn't. Material. It's madness. Listen to the next. وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً. In Arabic, mawadda means mutual love. It's not one-sided love. Mawadda is very deep. Mawaddata wa rahma, and mercy. Mutual love means both sides give. See, we are supposed to do mawadda to Ahlul Bayt. قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى. You give mutual love. So why did the Prophet say that? Prophet said it unequivocally, without any hesitation, because Ahlul Bayt has already given us the love. Now we need to give it back.
Thank you, Brother Hassanain. And I think in line with this discussion about, equality of men and women, it reminds me of the verse of Surah Al-Hujurat that we've been discussing, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُم مِّن ذَكَرٍ وَأُنثَى وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِندَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ. That, O mankind, we created you in male, female, different nations, different tribes, just so you may recognize one another. So there's beauty in diversity, but the best amongst you, inna akramakum indallahi atqakum, is the one who's most God conscious, the one who fears God the most, the one who protects himself from evil the most. Inshallah, as always, we quickly run out of time, and as 60 minutes is definitely not enough time to do justice to this topic of women in Islam and the importance and the role of women in Islam. But inshallah, I'd like to ask each of the panelists to please share some final thoughts as we approach the conclusion of tonight's program. Sister Hafsa, you'd like to start, please?
Yeah, sure. I think it was so good that Hajj Hassanain talked about the ability to have mawadda, because it is about having that mutual relation of giving and caring. because I think often what we forget is that when we are in a relation, we feel that one has to give more than the other. That's the expectation that we normally have, and some often it is women who are expected to give more. But what I feel is that if you want a successful relationship and you want to continue with that, is you always need to have that balance, like Hajj Hassanain mentioned, the birds with two wings which balance out each other. If either of the wing were not there, the balance would go out. So and that's what I always tell my husband, because I feel that he balances me out. Just to offer some concluding thoughts, and I think it is really important to mention this particular thing that I want to talk about. I don't know how many of us would have read this book. It's called The Wise Fool of Baghdad, which is about Behlul. My 6-year-old daughter, she reads it every night religiously because she likes one particular story in it a lot. It's called Daddy's Girl. And she's got this, she reads it and she comes to me and she's got the sparkle in her eyes and she says, Mommy, did you know if women weren't there, there wouldn't be anything in this world? And I said, yeah, that's true. And she always reminds me, she keeps telling me that, we are so important for the whole existence of the whole life cycle, to be honest. And that's a very good feeling to carry on and live with as a woman. So just before I conclude, I really want to pay my respects and regards to all the women out there, and whatever role they are playing. Chances are you'll be having multiple roles you'll be playing, but the woman in me salutes the woman in you. And on this honorable night, I think we do need to acknowledge womanhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Hafsa. Sister Barak, please, if you'd like to add in some final thoughts.
I actually have a few words of poetry, if you're okay with me ending it off like that. Yeah? Okay. From her greatness, it would be nice to look into the past the years to connect so fast. At last, in wonder and respect, attention to her and expect that today's ladies in waiting are not understanding that her descendant is awaiting for her to raise her flag high from her examples of one so high, not needing to look at what today is in sight, as if it is all fright and not right, not to allow her to be deceived so bright, how to best honor and grieve her and her daughter and granddaughter. Again, go back to the roots of the lady of greatness and her books. See her for what she stands for you today. To avoid being so confused by the emptiness and hollow modern scripture, go back to the richness and the richness of the original lady of greatness.
Beautiful. Excellent.
Thank you, Barak, for sharing those beautiful words of poetry. Inshallah, Sister Mariam, if you'd like to add in some final thoughts.
Yes, thank you. That was beautiful. I think my final thoughts would be, as women who have strong examples of other women of faith in the Quran and in our history, that we have a lot to draw from, and that's just one of many components. Of course, we can draw from the men as equally as we can draw from the women, and for us to not confuse compassion and female leadership with that of needing to be justified or that there's something wrong. Female leadership will look different as male leadership. And just as the Quran says, a female is not like the male, it's very clear that we have our own place and our own method to lead and guide humanity. And too often, if we look to lead from the male perspective or what society is telling us what leadership should look like, we fall short from being able to truly guide and to be authentically who we are meant to be by what Allah has granted us. And so, my gratitude of looking at Khadija alayhi salam as well as all the women is for us to be genuinely who we are, to fully accept our fullness of both womanhood and realizing that who we are spiritual beings that's manifesting in a female body. And so we may use these strengths as a source of guidance for all, male and female.
Thank you, Sister Mariam, for sharing your thoughts. And of course, a common theme in our discussion tonight has been the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us role models, both male and female. We have, of course, the female role models we've talked about in Lady Fatima, Lady Zainab, al-Baneen, Lady Khadija, of course. And of course, we have the male role models and the prophets and the imams, and both given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for you and I to take lesson from. Inshallah, Brother Hussein, if you'd like to share some final thoughts before we conclude.
Yeah, thank you. There's much to say. As you know, we've only really hardly scratched the surface in this matter. But to sort of put it together, as Sister Mariam, Sister Hafsa, and Sister Baraka have mentioned, there's no need to belittle the other gender to validate one's own gender. So any sort of isms out there needs to be controlled. And we must understand that it's sad, honestly, whenever I read this, we talk about women's rights. That word is repulsive to me, women's rights, because there has been a group that has taken it, hence it's women's rights, because you'll rarely ever read anything called men's rights. If you read books, you'll never read something called, this is the theory of men's rights. It's almost like we've inherited, it's like the white privilege. They'll call you African American, they'll call you Asian American, they'll call you, Arab American, they'll call you Spanish American, then there's white. Like, hello, you're European Americans, remember that? Oh yeah, no, we own the world, you remember? You're all just inhabitants. So this whole concept of preconceived notions where everybody else is marginal, and then everybody outside of that has to fight for their rights. Black Lives Matter. Like, how ridiculous the world is to have taken the black race and punished them so much that they now have to bring Black Lives Matter. Even the angels, even the devils in the sky are laughing at us as you fools. We don't even destroy our own kinds, you guys are, right? So all of these rights that people are fighting for, it's unfortunate that they have to fight, and we must support them. But we must also tell them that you don't need to validate yourselves, as the women have said today. Be who you are, for God is the one. Allah says, تُعِزُّ مَن تَشَاءُ وَتُذِلُّ مَن تَشَاءُ لَا يَحْزُنْكَ قَوْلُهُم إِنَّ الْعِزَّةَ لِلَّهِ جَمِيعًا. Do not let what people say bother you. Honor lies with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In conclusion, tonight, as you know, the Shahada of Khadija alayhi salam needs to be continued to discuss. And the fact that she left this world in the month of Ramadan is profound, the way Imam Ali alayhi salam became shaheed in the month of Ramadan. But we must not forget the women like Zainab, the granddaughter of Khadija alayhi salam, who stood in front of a tyrant and addressed him as, "Oh, you son of a freed slave. Ya yabna tulaqa." I mean, you have to take this in context of a man who was drunk with power. At that time, having killed her family, and to have that strength to address this tyrant sitting drunk on a pulpit, and she addresses him as Ya yabna tulaqa. What have you to compare with us when our quality is so much greater than you are? We need to take lessons from that, from Zainab alayhi salam. Her wisdom, they say when she spoke, if you heard her from behind the curtain, you would think it's Imam Ali alayhi salam speaking. But the beauty was whenever she spoke, Imam Ali never interjected, because that was her reflection. He didn't need to support her. She was already her own personality. So I tell all the sisters in the world, all the women in the world, and I tell all the men in the world, don't ever marginalize a gender, not male nor female, and don't you dare ever say that one gender is less, or don't ever say that their brain is smaller or that they're more emotional than us. This is all rubbish and nonsense. It needs to be thrown out. And I have questioned our grand scholars eye to eye on this issue. And they have categorically convinced me and told me these are all fabrications of the human concoctions to try to marginalize the other side. We don't need to. We must honor ourselves and elevate ourselves, but we must respect the other sides, whatever the side is. And we must help them also to rise. For that is the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We didn't cover Surah Tahrim, the 66th chapter, but this surah I advise us all to recite in Ramadan. It is one of my favorite surahs that talks about womanhood. And in the end, Allah gives examples of the two kinds of women Allah has chosen. One is Asiyah bint Muzahim, when Fir'aun is killing her, throwing a rock, actually a heavy stone on her to kill her. She became Shahida. She says, Rabbi ibni li indaka baytan fil jannah. My Lord, build a paradise, give me a house in paradise. What she was implying is my consolation from this tyrant. And there was no worse human being who existed on earth than Fir'aun. And to have a woman like her who became the conduit from Musa to establish the Torah, let's go figure. When we look at prophethood, we think, oh, prophethood is only through men. Well, look, Allah says no. And I'm going to change this mentality, this awkward, myopic mentality of yours. I'm going to continue prophethood through a woman, Maryam. I'm going to continue imamat through a woman, Fatima. That when Jibreel comes down and the ayah of Tathir 33 comes down, Jibreel says, Fatimatu wa abuha wa ba'luha wa banuha. She is the axial point of the entire hadith and the revelation of verse 33, innama yuridullah. So we don't need to go far. We don't need to beg. And any of us dares try to find a weakness, we need to go and carefully introspect, meditate, and figure out the diseases in us, because enough is enough. It's time for us to honor each other. It's time for us to give credit to each other. And to me, it's wonderful seeing muhajjaba sisters, even the non-muhajjabas, who speak with wisdom for society and our leaders. I admire them. And I will continue to do so, because I believe if we don't, we will never grow in a society. May God give us this grace, inshallah. We will end with a dua. And once again, our condolences on this tragic loss. As they say, when Khadija passed away, the messenger cried the most. That year, Abu Talib also died. It was the year of grief, and then she died. I'll get teary-eyed if I continue to speak, for I can feel that love the messenger had, of his wife, that he went down into the grave and he cried so much. This is my leader. This is the man I do shahada for. And his tears are like my tears. You see, in other words, my tears follow his tears, in other words, not the other way around. And I feel that. I said, my messenger loved this woman so much. She must have been extremely special. And like Sister Hafsa does, she's running the Khadija Foundation. More power to you. Spread her name. Spread the name of our women, inshallah. But as a conclusion, they say Khadija had nothing left. Only the shroud was what she left with. What her status is in the hereafter, you and I will never be able to comprehend. And I pray that all our women and men reach high stations, inshallah, to be in their proximity. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Hassanain. Of course, there's so much more to discuss about this great woman. Inshallah, we'll continue these discussions during the subsequent nights, inshallah. We'll end with a short dua requesting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this blessed month of Ramadan to increase our ability to memorize the very book that was revealed during this month, the Holy Quran, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma arhamni bitaraq al-ma'asi abadan ma abqaytani. Farhamni min takallufi ma la yunini. Warzuqni husna al-manzari fima yurdhiki anni. والزم قلبي حفظ كتابك كما علمتني وارزقني أن أتلو على النحو الذي يرضيك عني اللهم نور بصري واشرح به صدري وفرح به قلبي وأطلق به لساني واستعمل به بدني وقوني على ذلك وعني عليه إنه لا معين عليه إلا أنت لا إله إلا أنت. With that, I want to thank all of the panelists, all of the sisters for joining us today and helping us with this commemoration and remembrance of this great lady. And thank you to all the viewers, as always, for joining in. And with that, we'd like to thank you for joining, and inshallah, we'll see you during the subsequent programs, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.